Imagine you've been handed a copy of Portugal's 2026 World Cup tactical plan. In this video, you'll see exactly how they plan to dismantle Spain, France, and England, point by point. Watch to the end to find out why Portugal could actually reach the final. Portugal will use planned rotations, rather than individual brilliance, to create chances and neutralize counterattacks at the 2026 World Cup. Expect a recurring pattern. The fullback moves into midfield, the winger stays wide or moves inside, depending on the opponent's formation, and the number 10 drops to link the play, creating a predictable 3-on-2 or 2-on-1 battle on the wing. This is rotation in practice, well-timed positional changes to create numerical advantages, not random movement. Specifically, watch for 3 triggers: an opponent shifting laterally, increasing the intensity of the press, or losing the ball on the edge of the penalty area, and the sequence of actions will be as follows. Trigger 1. The right back moves into the half space to become a passing option. The winger maintains width to pin the defender. The number 10 drops to receive the ball, opening up a vertical pass to the striker, who has moved wide to draw the center back with him. The result is either a penetrating pass into the area or a back pass to the on-rushing midfielder. Trigger 2. The rotation of the holding midfielders. One holding midfielder moves higher to press. The other drops to make a complementary pass, allowing for quick diagonal changes to bypass the press. Trigger 3. The rotation of the attacking trio. The striker drops. The attacking midfielder runs behind the defense. The winger adjusts to break through the man-to-man defense. You'll learn precise instructions for on-ball play, off-ball responsibilities that provide protection during transitions, and the counterattacks Portugal relies on when rotations create gaps. Stay tuned, as we'll first break down each rotation with specific movement patterns and simple exercises you can use to see how these theoretical substitutions translate into concrete moments on the pitch. Why are Portugal's tactics considered one of the most flexible and dangerous? Portugal's squad includes multiple multifunctional players. Bernardo Silva drifts across midfield and wing. João Cancelo routinely inverts from full-back into central spaces, and Bruno Fernandes operates as both creator and late attacker. And that personnel base is the first reason their tactics are so flexible and dangerous. Because those players are comfortable on several lines, the team can reconfigure mid-possession without substitutions. A nominal back 4 can become a back 3 in one pass, while midfield triangles morph into vertical double pivots. This is not theoretical. It is executed through planned rotation cues and role triggers that players know instinctively. When building attacks, the rotation pattern is simple and specific. One fullback pushes into the half space, the nearest central midfielder sidesteps into the vacated zone, and a winger tucks inside to occupy the lateral channel. The sequence creates a numerical overload between the opponent's fullback and center back. Then a vertical pass, often a diagonal into the forward running inside forward, splits the defensive line. Quick, precise. The winger who tucked inside becomes an additional creator. The overlapping fullback becomes the vertical outlet. That interchangeable movement forces opponents to choose who to follow, and those choices create exploitable corridors. Rotations are just as deliberate defensively. If a wingback is caught high, a center back will step wide to cover while the opposite fullback drops into a compact back 4. Simultaneously, one of the midfielders slides to form a screening line in front of the defense. This shifting of responsibilities is coached as a small step rotation. Step 1. Cover the immediate lane. Step 2. Compress the half space. Step 3. Press the ball carrier. Short bursts of pressure follow the rotation, designed to force backward passes or hurried clearances that Portugal then counterpresses aggressively. The result is frequent turnovers in transitional areas where attackers are already positioned to exploit gaps. Practical execution also relies on role hierarchy rather than rigid positions. Some players are designated rotators, who habitually vacate zones to create space, while others are anchors, who remain to provide structural balance. For example, The deep-lying midfielder keeps possession angles and only leaves his lane when the rotation sequence has an immediate vertical option. Coaches drill the timing. A rotator moves only when the anchor's angle is secure. That timing is why the rotations rarely create chaotic gaps for Portugal. Instead, they produce coordinated overloads and rapid forward progressions. Finally, the dangerous edge comes from transitions between patterns. After an overload has drawn defenders across, Portugal often reverses play in one pass to a fullback or wide player who has space to sprint into behind the back line. Those long, diagonal switches are not random. They're the planned finish to earlier rotations that intentionally pulled opponents out of a compact shape. The combination of multifunctional personnel, rehearsed rotation sequences, and disciplined anchors is what makes their system both flexible to in-game demands and consistently dangerous in execution. Basic structure, starting framework, and philosophy. Under the national team's current coaching staff, the starting framework emphasizes a compact core of midfield control, fullbacks who provide alternating width, and a front line that interchanges between wide and central channels. The spine is built around a double pivot concept. One midfielder sits to shield the defense and recycle possession, while the other drifts into half spaces to connect with attacking players. In practical terms, that means the goalkeeper and center backs look to play short when pressured, inviting the deeper pivot to step sideways and receive, which then creates angles for progressive passes. Rotation rules are explicit and rehearsed. For example, when the right full-back pushes high, the right-sided pivot drops in front of the right center-back and forms a back three. The right winger tucks into the half space to create a local 3v2 against the opponent's left side, and the striker either drifts wide or drops between the lines to pull a central defender out. Short pass. This sequence turns a narrow defensive block into an overload on the flank and opens diagonal passing lanes to the opposite wing. Coaches train the pivot to accept the ball on the run rather than standing static. That movement is what triggers the rest of the rotation and prevents the back three from being bypassed. Execution in transition follows the same rotation logic, but reversed. After a turnover in attack, the nearest midfielder presses immediately, while the other pivot rotates back to cover the vacated channel. Simultaneously, the fullback on the turnover side drops to a more conservative position, and the opposite fullback delays his forward run to prevent a counter overload. Quick. Practically, players are given trigger cues: a switch pass, a forward dribble by the opponent, or an aerial second ball each demand a predefined rotation pattern, so the unit remains compact and can either counter-press or recover shape without individual panic. In the final third, rotations aim to destabilize marking rather than create chaos. When the central attacker drops into the pocket, the adjacent winger is instructed to stay wide or accelerate beyond the last defender, depending on whether the receiving midfielder turns. If the receiving pivot attracts two markers, the opposite fullback is coached to time a late, overlapping run into the space vacated by the dragged defender. A simple example: pivot receives between center backs, looks up, plays a first-time pass to the overlapping fullback. The winger simultaneously cuts inside, occupying the central defender. Clean and intentional. Training focuses on the pass quality and the sequence timing, so these rotations become telegraphed movements rather than random switches. Defensive rotations are equally concrete. The team presses in coordinated bands. A front player engages, the adjacent winger narrows to channel play wide, and the nearest pivot steps up to cut passing lanes while the other pivot screens the space behind. When one defender is beaten, a midfield rotation is triggered. One midfielder steps diagonally to cover, while a fullback shifts inwards to restore numbers centrally. Short recovery steps and immediate communication are drilled so rotations occur in a single breath rather than over several seconds. These are not abstract ideas. They are specific positional exchanges with assigned responsibilities, practice patterns that link theory to on-field execution. Attack changes, 3-2-5, overloads. A 3-2-5 shape organizes three central defenders behind two midfield pivots while committing 5 players into advanced positions, which creates multiple overload opportunities across the pitch. In practice, the two pivots split responsibilities. One remains as the primary screen in front of the back three, the other acts as a shuttle, stepping laterally or forward to receive under pressure and link to the wingbacks or inside forwards. This dual role is essential to maintain defensive balance while supplying quick combinations that exploit 2v1s on the flanks and 3v2s in half spaces. Rotations must be explicit and rehearsed so the formation does not collapse when opposing teams counterpress. Example sequence for a left flank overload. The left central defender carries the ball short to the left pivot. The left pivot opens to the touchline and plays a 1-2 with the left wing back. The left inside forward drifts narrow into the half space, drawing the opposing fullback infield. The wingback then overlaps into the vacated channel to receive behind the opponent's winger. Short sentence. The key timing cue is the inside forward's first step inside. That movement creates the 2 versus 1 on the flank by pulling the opponent's wide defender away from the outside corridor. Concrete central rotations create vertical overloads between the lines. For example, a striker dropping into the line of the pivots pulls a center back up, which opens space for an attacking midfielder to run in behind. Quick execution. Center back to pivot, pivot to striker dropping. Striker lays back to inside forward, who times a penetrating run between the two opponents who were dragged out of position. Pace of the pass matters as much as the run. A delayed pass allows the defense to recover, whereas a weighted through ball exploits the forced imbalance. Coaches should rehearse this with pattern drills emphasizing the striker's angle of drop and the inside forward's timing of the forward run. Wide overloads also rely on simple combination plays that are easy to read and hard to stop when practiced. Wall pass between wingback and inside forward. Overlap, then cut back. Switch to far wing, expecting a secondary overload there. Short note. When the ball is shifted quickly from one flank to the other, the two pivots must rotate to become temporary halfbacks. One moves laterally to cover the vacated channel, while the other steps up to support a counter press in case of turnover. Trainers can drill this as a 6-on-4 scenario where the attacking 5 practice creating 3 distinct overloads: flank, half space, and central, within 8 seconds to simulate match tempo and pressing windows. Defensive transition rules must be drilled alongside attacking rotations so overloads do not leave the team exposed. If possession is lost during an overload sequence, the nearest inside forward must immediately press the ball carrier while the adjacent wingback drops to cover the channel. The shuttling pivot recovers to a central shield, and the other pivot drops into the back 3 to restore a 5-man defensive base. Use clear verbal cues and visible body orientation training. The player receiving the ball must open their body to the sideline when targeting a flank overload, and the supporting pivot must show for the pass before committing forward. Practical repetitions include 3-phase exercises: build, overload, and recovery, with timing markers to condition decision-making under pressure. The role of creative midfielders. Creative midfielders act as the primary connectors between Portugal's build-up and the final third, tasked with controlling tempo, opening passing lanes, and producing the decisive through pass or ball into the box. They must be comfortable receiving under pressure in the between-the-lines space, able to orient their body quickly, and switch play with both short combinations and long diagonals. Practical expectations include quick first-touch orientation to progress play, scanning to identify overloads, and the intelligence to either release a forward with a line-breaking pass or recycle possession to reset the attack. Rotations are fundamental and should be explicit rather than abstract. A common constructive rotation. The defensive pivot drops laterally to receive from the center backs. The attacking midfielder moves into the vacated central lane to become the new outlet. The fullback on that side then overlaps into the high lane vacated by the winger, creating a triangle. Execute it by timing. Pivot receives on the half-turn, plays a one-touch to the attacking midfielder, who either lays off to the overlapping fullback or pierces a forward run with a threaded pass. Another rotation for breaking compact defenses involves the number 10 drifting wide into the half space as an inverted winger tucks inside. The central midfielder shifts into the half space to sustain the numerical advantage, and the striker makes a diagonal run to drag central defenders out of line. Coaches can rehearse this with positional rondos where the midfielder practices 3 outcomes: forward pass, switched play, or penetrating dribble. Defensive and transitional rotations must be equally clear and rehearsed. When the creative midfielder steps up to press an opponent's deep passer, a defensive midfielder must rotate into the channel he has vacated immediately to prevent a counterattack through the middle. Conversely, if the creative player drops back to help the pivot under pressure, a winger or wingback must slide inside to preserve the team's structural balance. For in-game execution, use simple triggers: loose touch by an opponent, a backward pass to a center back, or a central midfielder positioned with his back to your goal. Each should cue the creative midfielder to press or shelter. If the midfielder presses, the nearest pivot must cover the half space. If he drops, the nearest wide player must tuck inside to form a compact 3 across midfield. Linking theory to execution means translating the midfielder's vision into rehearsed passing templates and movement sequences. Train specific passing lines: short layoff to the fullback, 1-2 with the striker, or long diagonal to the opposite winger, and combine them with timed off-the-ball runs so every rotation becomes an expected, executable option. For example, a practice sequence: pivot receives, plays to the creative midfielder who quickly checks shoulders, 1 touches back into the channel, then immediately spins a vertical pass into the striker's run. If the pass lane is closed, the creative midfielder instead switches to the far wing for the overlapping run. Set pieces and free kick routines also exploit creativity. Use the midfielder not just to deliver the ball, but to execute decoy runs and short fire combinations that disorganize zonal markers and create pockets for late arrivals. Match management requires reading match states. When protecting a lead, the creative midfielder's rotations should favor safety, with more frequent drops to create angles for safe exits and fewer risky vertical passes. When chasing a goal, rotations become more aggressive. The midfielder will rotate into advanced half spaces more often, invite overloads on the flanks, and prioritize line-breaking passes over controlled possession. Clear communication, verbal cues, and pre-agreed hand signals, combined with drilled rotational patterns, turns individual creativity into a predictable team advantage, making the creative midfielder both a spark and a structural pillar in execution. Pressing and transitions. Portugal prioritizes immediate ball recovery through coordinated pressure after a turnover, with clear triggers that all players recognize: a poor first touch by the opponent, a backward pass to a center back, or an isolated receiver near the sideline. Coaches coach those cues until they become automatic. So when the trigger appears, the nearest forward initiates contact while 2 midfielders and a nearby fullback close companion angles to form a compact triangle around the ball. That first second is decisive. Win it and the team attacks with numbers. Lose it and the side collapses into a compact defensive shape to deny quick counters. Pressure is organized around simple role rotations rather than heroic solo chases. For example, the most advanced forward engages the ball carrier. The opposite winger comes narrow to cut the inside pass. The nearest central midfielder steps up to screen the pivot and take away the outlet into midfield. The fullback on that side holds slightly higher to squeeze the channel and be available should the ball escape short. Those 4 actions are practiced as a single, repeatable sequence, so each player knows whether to press, cover, or widen without needing verbal instruction. Coaches emphasize body shape, force the receiver to face sideways, and angle of approach, channel the press toward the touchline, over raw distance metrics, because proper angles create predictable turnovers. Rotations are explicit and drilled. When a forward sprints to press a center back, the paired attacking midfielder retreats a lane to prevent the long ball. Simultaneously, a central midfielder rotates laterally to cover the vacated pocket. The opposite fullback tucks inward to form a compact midfield 5 if the opponent escapes the first press. In attack after recovery, the rotations reverse quickly. The midfielder who dropped to cover becomes the immediate link for the quick vertical pass. The forward who pressed peels into the half space to offer a direct outlet, and the nearby fullback overlaps into the vacated wide lane to stretch the defense. These role swaps are practiced in pattern drills, so transitions feel like a choreographed set of one-touch movements rather than improvisation. Execution ties theory to simple, repeatable plays. Under pressure wins in the final third. The preferred sequence is press to force a side clearance or hurried pass. The nearest midfielder pounces for a 1-2 into the forward's feet. The overlapping fullback receives and drives at the back line, while the opposite winger sprints to the far post. Conversely, when regaining deep in midfield, the immediate objective is vertical progression. Quick second-phase passes toward the half space or a direct diagonal into the wing, followed by a rotation where the nearest central midfielder secures the middle and the striker drifts wide to create mismatches. These patterns are rehearsed with constrained rondos and transition games that emphasize the first 3 seconds after a possession change. Defensive transition is equally structured. If the immediate counterpress fails, the team retreats in predefined lanes. Center backs narrow. The pivot drops in front of them to screen the central channel, and both wingers tuck to become auxiliary midfielders to prevent diagonal switches. The goalkeeper also plays a role in transition management by directing the block and offering a low, safe outlet to reset. Training replicates this by forcing turnovers in small-sided scenarios and then rewarding teams that realign within 4 seconds. Coaches measure success by the consistency of rotations rather than by individual recoveries alone. How do these setups perform against top opponents? Portugal's planned setups emphasize positional rotations between wide forwards and fullbacks to create half-space overloads and reliable outlets in build-up. An execution that looks like an inside forward drifting into the central lane, while the adjacent fullback times an overlapping run to receive behind him. The central pivot drops between the center backs to turn a back four into an effective back three during progression. Coaches train the timing and repetition, 1-2 combinations on the edge of the press, quick diagonals to the opposite flank, and third-man runs into the vacated channels. These are not abstract ideas. On the training pitch, the sequence is simple. Pivot drops, winger tucks, fullback overlaps, long diagonal to the opposite fullback. Against high-pressing elite sides, the rotation aims to neutralize pressure by creating a 3v2 in the first phase and moving the ball quickly into the far half space. Short. Practically, the center mid who receives between the center backs must open his body to the touchline and scan for the inverted fullback or a direct switch. If the press commits the nearest opponent to the ball, the striker or inside forward immediately runs laterally to pull a center back out of line, giving the diagonal pass meaning. Players known for close control and quick release. Those who can accept contact and spin away, then hit a 25-30m switch, are prioritized for the pivot role. This reduces turnovers in dangerous areas and forces the pressing team to either overcommit or concede space behind. When facing teams that sit deep and block space centrally, rotations are used to unbalance the defensive compactness by alternating between central overloads and flank overloads. Long. In practice, the central striker drops to occupy one center back, which invites a short pass into the half space for an arriving inside forward. At the same time, the opposite fullback times a high, angled overload run to the flank. The sequence frequently ends with a low-driven cutback or a vertical pass into the channel for a late-arriving midfielder. The intent is to manufacture numerical superiority in pockets. 2 midfielders and a dropped striker against a single shuttling defensive midfielder, then rapid exploitation of the adjacent wide corridor. Defensively, rotations determine who presses and who screens, and this is where top opponents probe for weaknesses. The double pivot will rotate asymmetrically. One pivot steps to press the ball carrier, while the other screens the back line and covers the route of a counter run. Short. Execution requires communication and clear triggers, a switch of play towards a marauding fullback or a long ball behind the line, and players are instructed which lane to occupy as the front line slides. When rotations are mistimed, the result is a gap between midfield and defense. Elite teams exploit that by playing quick vertical balls or by sending direct runners into the space. There are clear vulnerabilities and corresponding mitigations tied to these rotations. Whenever a wide forward tucks and a fullback surges forward, there is an inherent risk of being exposed to counterattacks down the flank. Elite opponents with fast wingers will punish lazy recovery runs. Coaches therefore mandate a safety runner, usually the nearer pivot or the opposite winger, to delay the counter by occupying the channel until the fullback resets. Short. Practically, that means the coach drills a sequence where the pivot delays with a body-side shoulder block and the recovering center back covers the stride, giving time for the defensive block to reorganize. Concrete examples of the theory-to-execution link include training exercises where one striker repeatedly drops to lure a center back and two midfielders cycle through half-space exchanges while the fullback times overlapping runs. Success is measured not by aesthetics, but by the creation of at least one 2v1 or a quality final pass in the final third. Long. When elite opponents close the central lanes, the team switches to lateral rotations. Quick, precise switch passes that drag the defensive block across and open diagonals for runners. And the emphasis in coaching is always on the speed of the pass and the immediacy of the supporting run. Short. Portugal's own potential weaknesses. Portugal builds play through possession and space creation down the flanks, with fullbacks often pushed high and wingers drifting inside to overload central areas. This approach creates clear benefits in control and chance construction, but it also produces consistent structural vulnerabilities. The central corridor can become crowded while the channels behind advanced fullbacks and between the center backs and midfield become exposed. Opponents that arrange quick vertical transitions or run players into isolated wide spaces can exploit these gaps without needing elaborate patterns. When the team commits two fullbacks to overlapping runs, the natural rotation is for a central midfielder to shift laterally to cover the vacated channel. In practice, this rotation is easy to describe and harder to execute under pressure. If the pivot fails to rotate early, either because of poor positioning, delayed recognition, or being drawn forward by pressing, the covering lane remains open for direct balls in behind. That creates a repeated scenario. A cleared wide throw or a turnover is met by a diagonal long ball into the half space, and a lone center back must face a high-speed outlet with limited support. The theory is simple. The execution requires crisp, timed rotations and disciplined situational awareness. Pressing triggers are another weak point. Portugal often uses a coordinated press that hinges on the front line, pushing opponents to predetermined zones. However, when the first defensive line is bypassed or misaligned, the transitional rotation, where a holding midfielder drops, a central defender steps out, and a winger tucks to cover, can become disordered. Clear rotation instructions look like this. Pivot drops 2 steps to occupy the 6th position. The adjacent center back moves laterally to form a staggered back 3 for a few seconds, and the nearest winger screens the short passing lane. If that sequence is compressed or interrupted by a sudden switch of play, the team can be left momentarily numerically disadvantaged on the far side. Training and match management must link the theory to execution to avoid recurring failures. Coaches should rehearse specific rotation drills, a 5v4 transition exercise where the pivot practices instant lateral shifts, a broken play drill that forces the nearest midfielder to sprint into the channel within 2.5 seconds, and scenario work where fullbacks simulate recovery runs against fast wide attackers. In games, clear instruction windows help. Substitutions that replace an advanced fullback with a more conservative option, or tactical tweaks that pull one winger wider to relieve half-space congestion, are practical fixes. Without those disciplined, practiced rotations and simple contingency rules, the elegant possession system becomes fragile against direct, pace-focused counters. So, to summarize, Portugal's plan is based on 3 clear pillars: coordinated rotations to create space, a trigger-based pressing structure, and well-established set-piece patterns. In practice, this means the number 9 drops into the number 10 zone to draw the center back out of the defensive line. The closest winger moves into the half space, and the fullback moves into midfield, creating a new numerical advantage. When the holding midfielder moves forward to press, another holding midfielder drops to cover the space. These aren't abstract ideas. You can see them implemented in synchronization. A back pass distracts the center back, a quick diagonal pass a meter opens up the half space, and the third player's run finishes behind the vacated line. Training exercises reinforce this. The coach incorporates pressing rotation drills, 3 on, 2 numerical advantage drills, and shadow positioning repetitions into training so that each rotation becomes instinctive under pressure. If you notice rotations on the left flank, This is precisely the mechanism that will trigger them. Coordinated movement, instantaneous changes in coverage, and a predetermined passing trajectory. For defenders, this means sliding and covering. For forwards, it means synchronizing their runs with the pass, not with the touch. This clarity, who's moving, who's covering, when to pass, is how theory translates into goals and clean sheets. If you enjoyed this in-depth analysis and want more tactical insights, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you'd like me to analyze next. Thanks for watching. See you in the next analysis.